All right, cool. All right, everybody ready? All right, awesome. How's everyone enjoying AnDevCon so far? Good? Lots of fun stuff, good sessions? Awesome, awesome. All right, I'm Jared Sheehan. I'm an Android lead for Capital One here in Northern Virginia. I've been building software systems since 2005, mostly Java-based, which is why I made the jump to Android. I've been building Android apps since 2010, so I played with all the different flavors. Found my fair share of bugs within the Android source code, including things like the string methods or the string class, which is awesome. Like, how do you screw that up? So I probably shipped 10 or 12 different apps. That's a little background on me. I'm also the founder and organizer of the DC Android meetup group. And if you look right there in the middle, that is our brand new icon that's about 2 months old. It's pretty awesome if you ask me. It's got like this scary looking robot thing and several of the monuments. So if you guys are not members of DC Android, we hope you are and join as soon as you can. We do lots of fun things. In fact, we had a meetup last night where Antonio Zugaldia, he's one of the founders as well. He gave a talk on Android robocars, and tonight there's going to be a talk by Dave Smith on Android things down at Mapbox if anyone wants to go down to DC. Also, they asked me to mention that within the app you can actually provide feedback. I hope it's all positive because I have lots of loot to give away. So feel free to provide some feedback that way. It also would help me in giving me some feedback on the things that I do well and the things that I can do better. I usually like walking around in the rooms, but the room's not super big, so I'll probably stick around here. Small enough group. I like for people to ask me questions while I'm moving forward, and in fact, I'm encouraging it because I have swag. Yes, you ask questions, you get stuff.
How do we get this swag?
Yeah. So you ask questions, and so this is cardboard. We all know what cardboard is, and we've got one of these in each of these lunchbox bag thingies, which are way awesome. So, as you'll notice, we also have a couple of the viewers, the headsets. The first two, of course, are cardboard, and the other two on the side are the Daydream views. So. If you guys want to play with them, actually, I could send them around the room. Just don't steal them, please. I feel bad. There you go. All right, so I do lots of stuff. Couple of things. First is we hit 500 members of DC Android as of yesterday. So we're really, really excited about this. I actually stole this slide from Antonio. He made the first announcement last night. That's awesome. That is all about the community and everybody coming together and trying to improve Android. And we are the largest Android meetup group solely for Android in the DC area. So keep them coming. We try to have lots of good fun events. I recognize a few of the people in here. So thank you very much for making it awesome. We don't do much. We just get the speakers and find spaces, and you guys are what make the community run. The URL is down at the bottom. Along with a lot of the other things that I do, I also work for Capital One. I help to run the Android Summit, which is our local version of an Android conference. This year we're so big we actually outgrew the normal place that we keep it. This is the third year we've done it. We had to go to the Sheraton, which is the same place as DevFest DC, if any of you were there for that one. It's going to be really, really awesome. We just opened tickets the other day, and in fact, here's my little spiel. That URL right there will get you 25% off, including the early bird special. So it's usually $75. I think it's down to like $56 with a 25% off. That's the first time we've shared that URL. So take pictures, send it to your grandmother, email it to people, share it. Really appreciate it. It's going to be a lot of fun. We have 3 tracks. We have dev track, design track, and test track. And then we have another dev track the second day and 4 awesome workshops. The workshops are going to be Kotlin because everybody loves Kotlin, including Pete back there. So Kotlin, Flutter, if you've ever heard of Flutter, it's basically a cross-platform tool that Google is building that is written in Dart for iOS and Android apps. We're going to also do Google Actions, which the keynote talked about those a little bit earlier, and then an Android robocar. Really cool session with, again, Antonio, who is part of the meetup group. All right, so on to what this topic actually is, so Daydream. So I'm going to cover, here's the agenda, I'm going to cover a couple of items. I'm going to talk really about Augmented reality versus virtual reality, some use cases for VR, what VR really is. This is an introductory level course or session. The reason I chose Daydream is that I've done a lot of stuff with a lot of different apps. I've never done really graphic intensive software development. I really got into this because I grew up as a gamer and I like playing games and all that fun stuff, and I've never actually written games, right? So this is really an education for me, and I wanted to remove some of the blinders that are out there, at least for me, identify what they are, and try to educate myself and everyone else with these sessions as to what kind of virtual reality really is. And then, of course, since we're Android developers, I'm going to talk about Google's version of VR, and of course that's Daydream and their hardware. I'm going to talk about how it works, really some differences between what 3DoF and 6DoF mean, some of the options that are out there, because Daydream's not the only one. Pro tip, like I said, Daydream is not the only one. Developing for it, and of course questions at the end, or any time you want. All right. So, augmented reality and virtual reality. There's a common misconception about which is which and what is which. AR is really a technology that layers computer-generated images on top of your scene, right? So in theory, kind of how this works is you hold up your phone or your tablet or whatever it is, and then something is displayed. Okay, so augmented reality specifically for this. So I think this is the IKEA app, and let's say you're at home and you want to buy a couch or a table or a chair or something. You can hold it up and you can look through their catalog to actually see some of the furniture you might be interested in and how it would look in your room, in your actual room of your house, which is really, really powerful. You know, you don't have to go find IKEA. You don't have to drive there. You don't have to actually deal with their lines and their massive stores. And you can try different colors and different versions, and that's kind of what this is for. There's a lot of different use cases for AR, but it is not full virtual reality. It is augmenting what your perception is with something that is useful. Virtual reality, on the other hand, is a full immersion into a scene. Like the entire thing is more or less fake. It's different, and you can interact with it. You can, click things. You can do actions. You can hopefully speak to your environment and actually do lots of interesting actions within there. So that's high level of kind of what that is, and that leads us to this thing called Milgram's Virtual Reality Continuum. Okay, it's basically a scale ranging between real environment over here on the left, all the way over to a fully virtual environment on the right-hand side. Okay, so somewhere in the middle is augmented reality, augmented virtuality, and then actual virtual environment, fully virtual environment. There's a lot of really cool pieces. Oh, yes.
XR. Where's XR?
That's a good question. I haven't read up too much on XR. I have looked a little bit into it. I don't really know the answer to that question. But I'll tell you, you get the first swag.
Well,
You're welcome. All right. This is actually a slide taken from Google I/O 2017, and you'll see it's pretty much the same thing as the continuum here. So real world, and then you've got some augmented reality in the middle, and then a fully virtualized experience over here on the right. All right, so I'm going to discuss next some use cases. This obviously is how they would produce a virtual environment where you can be a stormtrooper and run around this little control tower thing and sit down and try to shoot some bad guys. All right, so some of the other ways that this actually works. As most of you can tell, if you look at cardboard, for example, you can see there are two lenses. So I'm going to talk about the lenses soon, but this is called, when you're looking into your display, you will actually have two separate views that each eye is looking at. This is called binocular vision. And the idea is that the views on each eye are actually separate. And there's a little bit different contortions to give a little bit of depth perception on the right and the left-hand side. Daydream and other virtual reality and AR systems kind of do most of that for you. There are some APIs that'll let you kind of tweak it a little bit. But the idea is you look at this these binocular inputs, and then your brain actually stitches it together into something called a stereoscopic image. This is another example. So you'll actually see on your phone, that's actually what it looks like. So you'll have a view here, you'll have a view here, you'll have something in the middle, and your brain sees a fully virtualized field. Does that make sense? Okay. So stereoscopic 3D, basically it adds another layer of depth perception. Your brain stitches this together, and you can interact in your environment, and you don't really see this line in the middle. So what's next? So I talked a little bit about AR, a little bit about VR. Is there anything else we can do that is kind of a platform? The answer is yes. Who's heard of 360 video? Most everybody? Yeah, awesome. So there's a lot of really cool things with 360 video. The idea is that you can experience a scene or an environment and be able to look all the way around from the comfort of your own home. So top of a ski mountain would be a really good one, for example. Like I actually have seen those for quite a while. I think 10 or 15 years ago was probably the first time I actually saw one of these things, and I could look at the top of from the top of a ski mountain and actually look and see what the snow was like, right? So is it thick? Is it powder? Is there nothing there? There's a bunch of ice. Is there anyone actually up there? So you can decide whether or not you want to go up there. Now you can view it with your headset from the comfort of your own home fairly easily. So if you actually look at this, the idea is that this building over here, these buildings are right next to these buildings. So you can stitch them together, and then you can just walk all the way around and look at it, and you can see your experience. All right. So how does this work? So this is a rig called Odyssey that was co-designed by Google and GoPro. You'll see there's 16 GoPros right here, and they're sitting on a rig, and it's part of what's called a jump platform. And the jump platform, basically what it does is you turn this on, and Google takes all of the images and all the VR, and then it sends it off to Compute Engine, and it just stitches them all together and creates the video for you. Not everyone needs one of these. This one, I think, starts at $15,000, so it's really inexpensive. Question?
Question like this, though. Have you seen any with focus capabilities? So you wear glasses and focus it with your eyes.
I haven't seen any with focus, but you'll see there's actually some depth in there, and they built it so, at least the Daydream View, so you ought to be able to wear it with glasses. So, and you can adjust the strap to be forward or back. So.
You've seen this a little bit. This is the Samsung 360.
Oh, okay. Yeah, actually, I saw that Udacity's offering one of those.
It's pretty good.
It is. That's cool. So, have you actually? How often have you used it?
So I've had it for about 3 weeks. 2 or 3 weeks it came out.
And what do you use it for?
So mostly, well, I want to use it here. My wife and I are visiting from out of state, so
Awesome.
we're going to go see the sites this weekend. So that's part of it. But it was mostly just to. It's really affordable, $250.
Yeah, it's not $15,000, right?
No.
Yeah. I think this actually shoots. I think this is 4K.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But something like this, it's great for fun videos, just making things up.
Yeah. So how do you view it? Do you view it with cardboard or something else?
So you you end up like I have a Samsung phone that it's
So
really designed for phones. It'll work on the iPhone, but the video playback uses the Samsung player,
Right.
and then you can use there.
So cardboard also works with iPhones,
Yeah.
and we'll get into why that's true. It doesn't use Daydream, but question?
So is this the only platform to generate the content for Daydream, or?
No. This is just 360 video. So any headset that can render 360 video, this is, and whatever encoding they use should be compliant. Does that make sense? This is just 360 video, but it's lumped into VR because you usually use a VR viewer to look at it.
Okay, so is there another content platform that you generate generating platform for Daydream or?
No, there's lots of things. Like you can use your Daydream viewer, right? And so part of it is that as you turn around, it'll actually recognize that you're turning around. Your phone actually does it for you, and then it'll just adjust the scene as you move. Is that,
My question is only like the content.
what do you mean by the content? There's lots of camera rigs. This is just one of them.
Okay.
So, yeah. Let me pass this back to you. All right, cool. All right, so I thought this was a really nice GIF. It's a really good way to show the difference between virtual reality and 360 video. You'll see on the top image, 360 video is like a user is inside of a sphere and can kind of look around and interact that way. Virtual reality is more of you can interact with trees, you can move around the forest, you can actually walk around. So that's the difference. All right, so actual use cases. Okay. This is a scene from the Fox Sports VR app, which I played with some last year, and it's pretty interesting. The idea is that you have a man cave looking environment. This is your scene. You'll see that you're sitting on a couch, right? So this is the right side of the couch, this is the left side of the couch, okay? And this is your, quote, TV, and then there's an interactive display here, all right? And so the idea is that they provide additional features for viewing games. So this particular one happened to be a Wisconsin Penn State game, one of their college football games that they live streamed. Now they didn't actually live stream this in 360 video, but what they did is they allowed you to watch highlights. And I don't know if that's a licensing thing. It's probably they're still working on their capacity, their ability to support that kind of stuff. But the idea is that you can actually rewind the game to, say, 30-second increments, and you can watch replays. And you watch it from where they film it. And as you'll see in a couple of slides, this right here, look where you are. You're right on the field. Who recognizes this game? What game is it? Yes. This is actually the winning play of the Super Bowl. So so the Fox VR app supported the Super Bowl. So me and some of my friends, we were watching some of the highlights of that ridiculous game, and this was the winning play. And see how it's a little bit pixelated? And we'll talk about why it's a little bit pixelated, but once they get to a point where they remove most of the pixelation, like, why would you even go? Right? Like, what's the point? Right? So this type of stuff, I'd be really worried if I were an NFL owner as far as trying to sell tickets. But then again, they make most of their money with TV, so I don't know. All right. So next. So now we're going to start talking about the hardware. Okay? So optics. Right? So there's a lens here. Here's a lens here. All right. The optical lenses make it possible to focus on a screen. Pull out my phone. Okay. Focus very, very closely on a screen. They're basically magnifying glasses. That's really what the optics are. They don't do much else. And the idea is that if you hold your phone really close to your face, you can't see anything. But with the magnifying glasses, it makes it a lot more clear. But you're also putting your eyes very closely, so your pixel density actually appears to decrease, okay, which is why you see some of that pixelation. So there's some side effects to doing this type of thing. Like I said, it reduces the total resolution of the user's display, and it can appear pixelated. All right, so that's the basics of the optics. It's not a lot. There's not a lot there, but just wanted to make sure that everyone knew that's what the deal was. After that comes the display. Right, so this is your phone, and this is what is used as the display in the Daydream view. Okay, so you use the magnifying glasses, you look really closely, and then the display is basically the binocular rendering that we looked at earlier. So some of the displays for VR headsets are actually built into the headset. The HTC Vive and the Oculus Rift are two examples. Yes?
The lenses for different headsets differ much?
As far as I could tell, they didn't differ a lot. The lenses, the optics are really just magnifying glasses, and that's really all they're for. I didn't find anything about them being different.
So would you get in like Google
Yes and no. Like um, it just depends on where the headset is and how it's mounted, whether you're going to need the magnifying glasses or not, right? And considering that how Daydream works, it magnifies your experience on your phone. And as we see, there will be some hardware requirements around Daydream, like screen size. You can't be larger than a 6-inch device, and it can't be smaller than a 4.7-inch device. Some examples of external device requirements for some of the headsets, like I said, is Cardboard, the Samsung Gear, and Daydream, of course. So there's this concept of low persistence and motion blur, which is actually really interesting. The idea is that since you're so close to the screen, how you're so close to the screen and it's semi-pixelated, how do you reduce the blur as you move around and the pixels change? And basically what happens is that as you turn, the pixels that are around your eyeball change before you actually look at it, right? So your display, your IMU, which we'll talk about IMUs in a minute, can tell that you're changing your rotational perspective, and it changes the pixel before your eyes actually look at it. So that's how it reduces things like motion blur. So you don't actually see or perceive this motion blur. All right, tracking. So who knows what tracking is when it comes to VR systems? Okay. Yeah, basically tracking comes down to understanding what the visual should be that you show to the customer, to the user, right? So how do we do it? There are really two different types. There's rotational tracking, which is traditionally called 3DoF, and then there's positional tracking, which is really what's called 6DoF, and I'll talk about what those are in a minute. Rotational tracking has to do with moving your head up and down and whatever. Positional tracking has to do with not just the rotational stuff, but also moving throughout the scene and moving throughout the room, okay? Moving forward and moving backwards, okay? So how does that work? There's a couple of ways to do it. There's something called an IMU, which again I'm going to talk about in a few minutes, but it's basically a bunch of sensors that can track your head. Positional tracking techniques use things like cameras, lasers, and magnetic fields, and we'll talk about those in a minute. All right, so 3DoF, head tracking. So pitch, yaw, roll, X, Y, and Z. There's no depth in the room. 6DoF is all of that plus your actual movement around the room. Okay, so Daydream, traditionally until Google I/O this year, does anyone know whether it was 3DoF or 6DoF? So pre-I/O announcements for Daydream, does anyone know whether it was 3DoF or 6DoF? And by the way, DoF stands for degrees of freedom. I meant to mention that right there at the top. Why is it 3?
Because it doesn't track where you are. It's just sort of like look up and down and left and right.
Right, so the sensors in your phone, the accelerometers and the gyroscopes and the magnetometers can handle the rotational tracking. You don't have the sensors in a traditional smartphone to be able to do the full, at least reliable, positional tracking. Okay. All right. So that's what pitch, yaw, and roll looks like as if you were in an airplane. And then this is more of the positional tracking. By the way, these slides are going to be up on SlideShare afterwards, and they are also already, AnDevCon has them at AnDevCon.com/slides. Yes?
That Daydream is just really limited to viewing because, I mean, can you not move through your space very well?
You can absolutely interact with your space. There's lots of ways to do that, mostly through this,
All right. I didn't know that.
which we'll get to that in a minute. Okay, actually, you answered the question, and so did you. There you go. All done with that? Yeah. All right. So this is basically what I just described: the inertial measurement units, the IMUs. All your phones, almost all your smartphones these days, all come with these things. You have accelerometers, gyroscopes, magnetometers. There's a couple of other sensors in your phone, like the location-based GPS. But these are the ones that are used to infer your rotation of your head. Okay. And for more information on how to use Android device sensors, I did do a talk at DevFest DC last year on contextual awareness, which basically, here are the links. And again, you can get these slides from either SlideShare or AnDevCon. All right, so I want to talk about some of the other options within the VR platform that is not Daydream. And most of these are the 6DoF, I call them the 6DoF major players. So Oculus Rift uses something called Constellation. They use LED lights from a camera that's positioned. The LEDs actually come from the headset, you'll see right here in the top. And then you have a camera that is positioned within the room, and then it can tell where the user is going. And it also has its own IMU within the headset, right? So very similar to Daydream, only it has its own display and its own IMU within the headset. The HTC Vive is actually really interesting. It uses LiDAR, which is laser-based radar, and that's this image right here. And as a user walks around the room, it uses this LiDAR to figure out where you are. So it's two different technologies, and they do kind of the same thing, and that's still an open field of discussion as to which one works the best. Okay. All right. Now on to Daydream. All right. So Google I/O 2017, there were quite a few really interesting announcements. There are now 8 Daydream-ready phones, including the Samsung S8. And they announced right there, you'll see the second bullet point, this thing called a standalone Daydream headset, which is really awesome. So you don't need a phone. It is its own standalone headset. And no cables, no PC, nothing like that. So for example, the HTC Vive and the Oculus Rift have to be plugged into a very powerful development computer to make sure it works appropriately. They're saying that you're not going to need this with the standalone version. So that will reduce friction for adoption and ease of use for people to use. You can sit on your coffee table, you can plop it on your head, and it just works. At least that's the theory. We'll see how it works. We'll see what happens when it comes out, but I think that's pretty awesome. Another one, so Daydream 2.0 is called Euphrates, is going to come out with cast support. So the best use case that I can think of off the top of my head is your friend sitting there using any of the Daydream views or the standalone version, and it casts directly to your TV so your friends can watch it. Tell me that's not awesome. Plus, since it can cast, you can probably, I don't know, stream it fairly easily on something like YouTube, and then everybody can watch it. That's pretty awesome. So that's coming later, 2017. They still don't have any dates for this yet. How's it going to work? So we talked about Constellation and Lighthouse for HTC and Oculus, only the other order. Google came out with something they call WorldSense. They call it inside-out tracking. It's a version of, they basically developed this for Tango, and they have used it for their VR system for Daydream. It is a fully 6DoF positional tracking system, so it does the rotational and the positional tracking. It uses something called VPS to navigate indoors, which is pretty cool. And like I said, the previous versions of Daydream only had 3DoF support. So I'm interested to see how they're going to support the standalone version and also the Daydream views and the 3DoF versions. So this is basically the GIF that they showed at I/O. Yes, I stole it from some of the links that they have. Basically, you have 2 wide-angle cameras. They detect some of the features in the room, so things like the table and the various items that are on it. And they fuse these images together while you move around the room. And they do inferences over and over again to get better and learn what is actually in the room. So as you move around the room, they take images, basically video, and apply that to their filters and display what it is you're supposed to be looking at. So they're building a 3D model as you walk around the scene. So what's it going to look like? So HTC is a partner of the standalone version of Daydream 2.0. This is on their website right now. That is the only thing that I've seen. I haven't seen any leaked images, but this is what allegedly it's going to look like. So that is the silhouette for the View Daydream standalone headset. Any questions so far?
Didn't know any specs for the standalone.
There are requirements to be Daydream enabled phones for sure. I don't think they've necessarily gone into specs for the standalone version, as far as I am aware. However, there are some you'll see a little bit later that there are some very stringent requirements. Things like you have to be able to render two simultaneous videos on the phone at 60 frames per second, for example, right? For obvious reasons. All right. So I want to throw in this in there. I want to talk about Cardboard versus Daydream. Cardboard was a Google 20% project by, I believe, the team in France, where they were basically scanning a lot of imagery for the Louvre and some art stuff, and they thought this would be really cool to render it in 3D. So they built this cardboard thing. It's got some magnetometers that register the movement of basically clicking on the screen on, well, where is it? All right, no, I'm sorry. The magnetometer is to, I believe, detect that you're actually in the cardboard. I believe. I think that's right. But it's a really cheap and inexpensive way to get 3D images onto this viewer. It's $15. It's fairly inexpensive. Each of these swags I gave out has one in it. So it works on iOS, it works on Android. The problem with it is that there are no requirements. There are no performance requirements, like you have to maintain your 60 frames per second in each view. So of course, what happens is that you end up with pretty poor experiences. It's kind of crappy, but it's low barrier to get in. The HTC Vive and the Oculus by themselves are $600 to $800. Plus, you have to have a $2,000 to $3,000 gaming rig to make it work. So the barrier to get in and actually see some of this stuff is pretty cool. So Daydream. What's the difference? The phone is now optional if you have the standalone version, but you get a headset and you get a controller. Your input are the IMU sensors. You have some click events. The Daydream View is at least pretty inexpensive. Last I checked, it was $79, and that's this thing right here. Comes with a controller as well. Not bad at all. And the standalone versions, a lot of people are thinking it's going to be a couple $100, but that's still not bad. That's still not bad at all. All right, so device hardware requirements. So there's a Android 7.0 Nougat compatibility definitions document that's linked there. There will be an Android O compatibility document as well. The bottom line is that you have to support Bluetooth LE. Your 4.7 to 6 inches, I mentioned that earlier for your display. Resolution has to be 1080p. You have to support Vulkan. You have to decode, there you go, your 2 instances of 60 frames per second video simultaneously. Consistent rendering, and you have to have some thermal capability to be able to read the surface temperature of your device, because most of the devices get really hot. Trust me, they do. So headsets. Some of the headset requirements are you have to have the lenses that I mentioned earlier. They say there has to be a strap, but it may not need to be a strap. You have to have some way to attach it to somebody's head. The near field communication, that's actually pretty interesting. That's how it detects that you're actually in a Daydream enabled phone, and that's the experience that you want. So you don't have to click any buttons or anything. You just plug it in, and it just automatically recognizes and jumps into Daydream mode. The Daydream View actually has no electronic components, and you can actually put it in the washing machine if you want to. It's kind of cool. Now we're going to talk about the controller, this thing. All right. So the controller actually has its own IMU, and it is 3DOF, of course. It has an accelerometer, gyroscope, and an orientation sensor. You have a click pad, as you'll see, kind of right at the top. It's not really a touchpad, but it's clickable. So you can click on there, and also it's sensitive enough to swipe forward, back, move your finger around, and you'll get all of the events sent back to the device, which then controls the environment in the scene. You have a couple of buttons. You've got an app button, which is this one right here, and you'll get that click, and you can do things like open doors or, fire at enemies, swipe your sword with this thing, and it'll send those events to the device to render appropriately. Of course, you have volume buttons, because it'd be really weird to have to try to stick your fingers in there to turn the volume up and down. And then there's a home button, which will take you to the Daydream Google Home. And of course, you have a 3D pointer. Well, what if you're building a game and and you're a startup and you don't have any money to actually buy one of these Daydream Views, or at least a controller, or you're building your own controller? So there's an emulator that you can actually use, which is pretty cool. So you can have a controller emulator app. You can download it from the Google Play Store, or just, I think there's a GitHub. So it's right there, the documentation, I believe it's open source, so you can build it yourself. And one of the things that's cool about it, well, you double tap to emulate a click because you obviously can't click on your phone. They also have what are called overlays. So you can use your phone as the emulator, or as the controller, sorry. So you have an overlay, you can tape or paste the, or stick the overlay on top of your phone, and then you can interact with it that way. To actually click, you have to double tap on it, but it works, which is pretty dope. So the communication from the controller to the phone, I thought this was an interesting thing to describe. So it's Bluetooth, and so you have your app on the phone, and then there's an SDK, talks to the Google VR services, and it's all Bluetooth to the device, and then it's streamed directly. All right, so development types and documentation. So there's Google VR supported docs. There's Daydream, iOS, VR SDK, which is really for cardboard. Unity and Unreal both support Daydream out of the box. They launched, when Daydream launched, they launched with support for both of them. And so here's some links to that. And this, of course, is the Google for VR website, documentation site. They've got a nice VR repo. There's a whole bunch of things in their repo, a bunch of sample code on how to do stuff. So platforms. So like I said, Unity and Unreal, those are really for the manipulation of the scene. You don't really create your models and your assets there. You import them. You use something called Blender, I hear, is one of the most popular, and there's a couple of others, one called 3ds Max, where you create your objects and then you import them into Unity. Has anyone used Unity in this room, or Unreal? Okay. So if you're familiar with those, you just basically import the Google SDK for Unity or Unreal, and things are pretty straightforward. So this is actually, since I played with Unity, I'm going to show the Unity one. This is the Unity platform. So you've got your hierarchy stuff, your scene, your assets, your object model inspector. So you select an object that's in the scene, and then you can change a bunch of stuff here. I'm not going to go into that. That could literally be its own talk. But it has out-of-the-box support for Unity, and there's also a Udacity VR class, if you want to take that goes through a lot of this. And I think you get the 360 camera that the gentleman just showed from Samsung if you complete it. All right, so home screen. So Daydream Home is launched as soon as you put the phone into your Daydream view, right? So you've got a couple of windows in here. You have the discovery window where they say, hey, these are cool apps, you should play those. In fact, I've played this particular one, the Fantastic Beats. It's not bad, it looks really good. I was surprised. This one looks pretty awesome. You get a sword, and you can like swipe at stuff, and I think they've got really good effects. It looks a little Tron-y, but it's pretty fun. The main piece of showing this slide is that you come with the full power of Google Play. Okay, you get this out of the box. You get access to payments, discoverability. I think it's like 200 countries at this point. It's a consistent platform. You get some analytics out of it. In-app purchases, all sorts of cool things that you get out of the box. And as I mentioned before, if you're going to build a Daydream app, there's only about 150 as of Google I/O, which is 3x improvement from January, which is still really awesome. But this is ripe for the picking, especially with a standalone version coming. All right, so I talked about developing, talked about Google Play Services, publishing. So Google Play Services, Google in general, when you upload an APK, has had some pretty lax guidelines as far as publishing these apps to the App Store. I think they run some static analysis tools and some anti-malware detection and a few other things, but that's about it. For Daydream, it's a bit different. So they want to make sure that there are actual app quality requirements wrapped around Daydream. So a couple of things that to pay attention to. So there's a whole list. This is the list for you have to comply with. So they do an actual review. I don't know how long it'll take. I don't know. But basically, there are a couple of design reviews. So users have to be able to focus on objects and read necessary text. Makes sense. The controller, I mentioned there's like a laser pointer. There has to be a laser pointer of some point where you can click on UI targets. There's a couple of items that I think is pretty interesting. The first one is FN-M1. If your app, you want to port it to Daydream and use Daydream platform, and you use NFC, you're going to have to find something else. You're not actually allowed to declare the NFC permission within your manifest because it is solely used for automatically launching into Daydream mode when you put it into your View headset. Okay, so I thought that was pretty interesting. So you have to, your app, if it's running, it can't display thermal warnings after 30 minutes of usage. So it has, you basically have to, your minimum is that you have to make sure that you don't do things so computationally intensive that you don't overload the thermal sensors on your device in less than 30 minutes. And then you also have to have your own VR icon. So not just a regular icon, but your own VR icon. So there's some challenges with this. Some people get, something called simulator sickness, which is really similar to getting motion sickness or seasick, that kind of stuff. You can be nauseous, headaches, anything else that can cause your, a mismatch of sensors of motion. The idea is that your body is telling you that you're doing one thing and you're viewing and interacting with a scene, and there can be an imbalance to you moving around in the rest of your body, and your other sensors within your body, your internal sensors, are telling you something else, and then that can make you, have headaches and not feel very good. So sometimes you see something, they call it a screen door effect, but most of these requirements, that they have for app quality in your hardware should hopefully reduce the screen door, but eventually if you're having some lag within your rendering on the screen, you can start seeing a screen door. It looks like a screen door. And then of course there was the you have to have a headset, you have to put something on your head, you have to have a controller. So there's some barriers to adoption that I think that can be overcome, but there's still barriers to adoption, and there's increased friction to be able to use this. Yes.
What can you do within your app to stop motion sickness or reduce that?
I would say there's probably a couple of things you can do. So, I would say as you build your scene and you create your canvas that you're actually rendering whatever your scene is, I would reduce the amount of kind of jerky motions left and right. My brother actually gets motion sick pretty easily, and depending on what movie we go see, because he and I like to go see movies, and this isn't 3D, but I think it is a similar use case, where if Hollywood started doing this thing where like the camera jumps around a lot, and if your scene is very similar to that, I think it can increase the odds of something like this happening. And I'll give you an example, and he probably would be mortified that I'm going to say this. But we went and saw one of the original King Kong movies probably 6 or 7 years ago. Not the original, but not the last one, the one before that. And they did a lot of that jumping around, and he actually got really sick and had to go throw up in the bathroom because of the actual viewport that he was looking at. And so I think that could similarly happen if, depending on what type of game you're making. So just be cognizant of that as you're building your graphics and your scene and how you interact with it. So Daydream's future, and this is me totally just throwing it out there what I think would make sense. Google Assistant integration. Wouldn't it make tons of sense for us to walk around and just say, hey, open that door, hey, punch that bad guy, interact with this object. I think that makes tons of sense, and be able to send your actions directly to the phone to be handled by the APIs. I think that makes tons of sense. Multi-controllers. I've only seen single controllers for Daydream stuff. Why not have a second one? It's just Bluetooth. You ought to be able to do it. iPhone support, you probably need some kind of SDK to make it work. I know that Bluetooth is not super open on the iOS platform. You kind of just get told that you're connected, and they kind of just send you events. You don't have anywhere near as much, kind of ability to customize it as you would on Google. But there's an interesting video that I found, and here's a link to it, where somebody made it work with iOS, and he hacked some Bluetooth controller stuff together for Daydream. So that was kind of interesting. So that's all I have. I think I'm a little bit over time. Actually, I'm about 15 minutes over time. Awesome. Of course, you got to have a Game of Thrones reference, especially since winter is here, right? If you guys have any other questions, since we're over time, I'm probably just gonna, shuffle outside and, ask me any questions, and we can talk. Thank you very much for coming. I appreciate it, and have a great rest of AnDevCon. Oh, one other thing. If you guys are interested, there are hackathons tomorrow. Our Capital One team built the escape room style hackathon, which is just phenomenal. They spent months on this. We have probably 8 to 10 people who built it. I won't go into too many details. We're giving away tons of free swag, including things like the LG Watch, Google Homes, and some, I think, $250 Amazon gift cards. And there's like 3 layers of that. You basically get some Android APKs and you get to try to hack into them, literally hack into the app, decompile them, and try to find backdoors. And if you have questions, then you can ask questions, escape room style, to unblock yourself. It's really, really awesome. So hope you guys consider going to that. All right, thanks.